Our next speaker is Mark Fisher. He is someone who I've had the honor of getting to know over the past couple of months. He is the Senior Director of Black Lives Matter Rhode Island. Black Lives Matter Rhode Island is a nonprofit organization committed to fighting for justice, equality, and empowerment for blacks in Rhode Island, and also globally to ending anti-black and systemic racism. Mark Fisher is personally committed to ending police brutality by eradicating its most integral component and to reforming the justice and prison system, which is equally implicitly biased. Mark Fisher puts his heart and soul into what he does, and it does not go unnoticed. So please welcome Mark Fisher.
Good afternoon, everybody. I have to say it is good to be back in Barrington. Fortunately, circumstances are not as dire as they were last time, where we were pressing for a hate crime, the first and only one so far in the state of Rhode Island. But before I start, I just would like to recognize our leader and founder who wasn't able to be here today, Gary Dantzler of Black Lives Matter Rhode Island, as well as my team, and every single one of you who made it out here today. First, I want to say it's important, before I go any further, to understand, for those of you who are here, that when we talk about Black Lives Matter, and specifically Black Lives Matter Rhode Island, and myself, Mark Fisher, my mission statement and my MO is to upset white comfort. And I know that's not a comfortable thing to have to address initially. But if you step back from a place of humility and compassion and understanding, then you'll be able to understand where I'm coming from. And so I want you to, for a second, challenge yourself and go with me on a mental journey as we think about what happened recently in the case of Jacob Blake and the subsequent protesting and rioting that took place. And there was a man who was on a mission of death and destruction. And as he killed his first victim, he was in the process of looking for his next one. And he was confronted by forces of good who would not allow that type of hatred to go unchecked, and he ended up taking the life of another one, and another one was injured. And his name is Kyle Rittenhouse. As he brandished this semi-automatic assault weapon in plain view for all to see, and he was the law enforcement was made aware that this man had just killed somebody. He walked by law enforcement, gave himself up with no problem, and was able to leave the state, go back home like nothing ever happened, while 3 people lay dead and wounded from the carnage that was inflicted by this man who was on a mission of death and destruction. So you ask, how does something like that happen? Well, it's very simple, because it's 2 Americas that we live in. There's a white America and there's a black America. And black America can speak for colored people in this country and those who are marginalized and disenfranchised, because we do, and often, and more often than not, we're on the front lines battling for all of those, taking it on the cheek. And so, I want you to challenge yourself now and say to yourself, how many times have you made an assumption based on skin color? How many times have you been in a position to not be biased, but you weren't able to consciously address it and you allowed that implicit bias to take over? And then it became fear, and then it became judgment, and then it became a consensus among you, your circle, your inner circle, your children, your children's friends, your colleagues and associates. And it went unchecked, it went unaddressed, and it became acceptable. How often, and I know that's asking you to step outside of yourself, but I want you to do that, because that's what it's going to take. Challenge yourself and understand that when we have these unconscious and subconscious biases against other people just because of the color of their skin, then what happens is what you saw with the case of Kyle Rittenhouse and Jacob Blake. What happens is what you see all over the country, in Portland, in Charlottesville, you name it, all over the country. Day after day, week after week, it's the same thing, it's the same theme because of our implicit and unconscious biases. So I want you to realize that it takes every single one of us, one person at a time, to accept that and address that. And then we can change that. Because to not speak is complicity. And that's why my goal is to upset white comfort, because they've been getting way too comfortable with racism and discrimination and segregation and business as usual. That's why I do this. That's why I got into this. That's why we do this. And so, when you see somebody in a store, if you happen to be an employee or an employer, how often do those instinctive and automatic initial biases kick in? When you're walking by someone of color, what goes through your mind? When you see them on television, when you're sitting next to them in a restaurant, what are you thinking? Are you thinking that's another person like me? Are you thinking about all the things that the media over the last few centuries have brainwashed us to believe? This fallacy of a master race that's been perpetuated by media, by print, radio and television, that black is less than, that black can't, that black is not good enough. Carefully crafted and cultivated lie. I want you to think about that next time. And I want you to take a story home with you. There's 4 great inventions that we use today. They're called the 4 great inventions of China. Gunpowder, the compass, paper making, and printing. Now, gunpowder, when it was invented or discovered by China, for 1 century, 100 years after they created the written formula for gunpowder, it was banned because they understood how dangerous it was and how deadly it was. They used it strictly for celebrations and for fireworks. But a century later, Europeans voyaging throughout the continents discovered and carried back with them the written formula for gunpowder. And on their way back to Europe, as they carried this formula, once they were able to imitate it and its deadly effects, a trail of carnage was inflicted globally on an unprecedented and biblical scale that the effects of are still felt today globally. We're talking about a genocide of a whole race of people and a culture. We're talking about the enslavement of a whole continent. And then we're talking about the only atomic bomb in the history of the world that was ever dropped on the people who invented gunpowder in the first place and then banned it because they knew how deadly and dangerous it was. And then we're talking about incarceration. Incarceration to a point where we're so numb to it that we don't even understand how inhumane and demonic it is to put children in a cell after they've been separated from their parents. That's because we privatize them and do it to black people all the time for profit. Because blacks have been having families separated from the inception of this country. Because fundamentally America understood that if you break up the family, then you break up the very heart of what makes a community. And if you don't have a community, then all you have is chaos. And chaos and anarchy rules. And when chaos and anarchy rules, not only do you not know who you are, you have no idea where you're going. So this is what we have faced and have been up against for centuries. The Bible teaches that the race is not always to the swift, nor the battle always to the strong, but to he who endures to the end. And I always like to add, but it's also to the most wicked sometimes, and most evil and cunning and underhanded, because that is the way of the world. And in that case, we have to accept things as they are here on earth, but understanding that one day we will all be held to account for everything we did, every decision we made, every cause that we championed or chose not to champion. And when that day comes, we won't have a beautiful, eloquent attorney to plead our case. We won't have a network of, judiciary colleagues and affiliates that can get us off. We won't have a huge, wonderful bank account that we can tap into. It's just going to be us naked before the maker of all. Naked we came into this world, and naked we will leave. So, we have a lot of work to do together. And these are the hard conversations that must be had. These are the tough discussions and the tough talks that we have to have with each other so we can understand, that truly understand. United we stand and divided we fall. Because racism ultimately will be the thing that destroys us as a nation. We will collapse as a country, a democracy, and a culture under the weight of segregation and racism and discrimination, because it is the soft underbelly of America. It is the Achilles heel. It is our one weakness that continues to rear its ugly head again and again. It's the one thing that I can't understand. Racism. But I'm here to say that this is not where it ends. We have the ability to choose our future. to shape our future, to create a new era, a new chapter, a new story in American history. And it's up to every single one of you out here right now to take these words not only to heart, but take them back home. Meditate on them. Spread them. You have to spread love. You have to spread these words, because understand, there are people in the world that are willing to fight and die for their hate. And we can be no less determined. Because when there is evil, I've found that whenever there is good people who are willing to stand up and fight against evil, good will always win. So I want you to be encouraged. I'm hopeful for the future. I like what I see right now. I'm thankful for all of you that came out and for listening to me. I wish you all peace and blessings. Thank you. I love you.